Welcome, everyone. It's really great to see some of these participants flying into our room this afternoon. Hope you all are having a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this webinar today. If you would like, please feel free to add your name and where you're joining us from today in the chat. We would love to hear from some of you. Where are you joining us from? Who's in the room today? See some familiar names in here. Renee, hello, welcome. A lot of familiar names. Good to see so many of you coming in. We'll get started in just a moment. If anyone wants to, Helen, welcome. Jan, hello. Wow, some really great names flying through here. So great to have everyone join us. For those of you who I don't know, my name is Dan Hinderleiter. I'm a Senior Policy Associate at Advanced CTE and one of the leads for Advanced CTE to support the year in review. Paul, if we want to go to the next slide, please. So every year we typically do a year-end year in review. And we often do one of these webinars to show what some of the really exciting and really interesting state policy initiatives are surrounding year in review, show some of the trends, show some of the information that you all have been looking for as it pertains to state policy that has been enacted, whether that's legislation, whether that's a state board action, budgets, anything like that. We typically include in our year in review report, and we release that in February each year. However, according to some of our members, that information is often outdated by the time it gets to you and not as usable as you all would like it to be. So in response to some member requests, and in order to make the information that we gather for you all as usable and as referenceable as possible, we wanted to make sure that we were sharing some of that information to you ahead of your next legislative sessions, so that you all can speak to the needs of your state and speak with some of your legislators and some of your other policymakers in your state to really ensure that we are paying attention to the needs of various state agencies and supporting you all in what you want to elevate for your own state. So this year we are sharing this information. We will also be demonstrating a live and sortable state policy tracker that will be released in September. So we'll give a little bit of context for that. And because we have a lot of local folks on the call as well today, I just wanted to share how some of this information might be able to be used by all of you in the local context as well. So Paul, if you could go to the next slide. So we do this year in review report in partnership with ACTE to really make sure that both at the state and at the local level, you can really understand what the national and state senior policy or state policy initiatives are, so that you can advocate for quality policy in your state. If you see a policy that you really think is an interesting model, then perhaps you can share that policy with someone else in your state, so that you can replicate that model for your own local area or for your own state, and really share out some of those other practices. We also want you to know what the national and state trends are, so that as you're speaking with stakeholders, as you're talking to community-based organizations, as you're talking to employer groups, as you're talking to other states about how to activate high-quality state policy surrounding CTE, you can explain some of those trends, and you can use this resource as evidence to demonstrate what some of that national and state policy trends are over the course of the year. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to Paul and Vilmer, who can introduce themselves, some of our policy associates from Advanced CTE and ACTE. If you do ever have any questions about the information that we're sharing today, if you wouldn't mind, please putting it into the Q&A box. Oftentimes we're putting the information in the chat, but if you put a question in the chat, sometimes it can get lost. So we want to make sure that if you do have a specific question, that you put it in the Q&A box, and we will try to address it as we are able. So with that, I'll turn it over to Paul from the advanced CTE team to introduce himself and start sharing some of the top level findings.
Thank you very much, Dan. As he just said, my name is Paul Mattingly. I'm a senior policy associate here with Advanced CTE. Very happy to be here to share with you some different findings and also policies that we watched over the year. First off, as of this July, 26 states have enacted or passed a combined 56 policies that impact CTE. Currently, right now, North Dakota and Washington have passed the most amount of policies. There are still 11 states with legislatures that are still in session, and 3 of them are in special session. So while all different systems do get affected by our CTE policies we track, secondary is leading right now at 35 policies. But then tied in a close second is going to be post-secondary and workforce. So while there is a mix between the systems affected, you can see that most of them are affected by a lot of the policies that are being passed. And then now I'm going to hand it off to Vilmer, and then he'll be able to introduce himself, and then he will talk about some of the top categories that have been impacted by these policies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Vilmer Alvarado. I'm the Research and Policy Associate at ACTE. I hope everyone is having a great day, and I'm also very excited to be here with you all to share some of the trends that we've seen thus far this year. So top policy categories, when comparing the top categories at this point in 2023, we can see that they're almost the same as last year's top categories, but in a slightly different order. And with the addition of governance, which this year came in at second, this demonstrates a consistent and continuous interest in these issues across the board by policymakers, especially with industry partnerships, which so far this year came in first last year and second in 2021. If we can move on to now industry partnerships. So now for a little bit of a deeper dive. In these next few slides, we'll go over some of the major and wide sweeping or innovative policies enacted in each of the top categories. So up first is industry partnerships and work-based learning, of which there were 23 different policies enacted across 14 states. California enacted SB 467 in July of this year, which prohibits the denied admission of a student into a community college pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, or internship program who does not have a social security number and instead uses a individual tax identification number or ITIN. This law is important and innovative in finding ways to support individuals like undocumented students in their CTE journeys. And in May, Montana enacted SB 444, which facilitates the work-based learning experience to better combine with students' course schedule through the incorporation of things like periodic benefits assessments, the outlining of supervisory roles, the proper designation of academic credit awarding, and most importantly, SB 444 amends regulations about minimum wage and overtime to exempt work-based learning programs. This allows students the opportunity to earn financial compensation whilst participating. And last but not least, we highlighted the state of Oregon, which enacted HB 3306 in July of this year. HB 3306 requires the establishment of wage standards and wage progression based on experience for entities that receive federal or state funds. The law also mandates the establishment of a training plan for individuals involved in the program if there's an option for paid work experience. And now moving on to governance. These are policies that have to do with the enactment or establishment of laws that amend the rules, procedures, or general workings of individual government offices or departments. So far, we've seen 11 states enact 17 different policies. Starting off with Colorado, SB 51, which established the Colorado Office of Future Work within its Department of Labor and Employment to look for engagement opportunities within and around emerging workforces. SB 51 also redefines apprenticeship programs and establishes an apprenticeship council within the apprenticeship agency of the state, which includes committees for building and construction trades and new and emerging industries. Next up, Iowa SF 318, which also established the new office, the Iowa Office of Apprenticeships, under the Department of Workforce Development, to serve in many capacities, namely to create state apprenticeship credentials in accordance with federal standards, to approve or deny applications for apprenticeship programs and sponsors, and to establish competency-based apprenticeship framework, among other things. SF 318 also sets new requirements for licensing authorities to grant occupational licensing and new on-the-job training and technical instruction responsibility requirements. And lastly, we wanted to highlight HB 2195 from Virginia, which creates the Department of Workforce Development in the state and the advancement to administer the state's workforce development programs. The law also establishes new definitions for apprenticeships, a corresponding apprenticeship council, and rules for apprenticeship agreements and non-discrimination in apprenticeships. I will now pass it back to Paul.
Thank you very much, Vilmer. And then moving on to data reporting and accountability. In this case, we had 8 states that enacted 16 different policies. First off, we wanted to highlight Wyoming, which instituted SF 78, which now requires the Department of Workforce Systems to provide information to secondary students on apprenticeships, on-the-job trainings, and other types of work-based learning programs. And then in addition to this, they need to provide a report to the department about what efforts they've had, their completion rates, and other types of progress, no later than October 1st of each year. So it's a combination of data and reporting and accountability for that. With Hawaii, they now mandate that the State Board of Education to report out on ways to increase access to extended learning opportunities and course credits for non-traditional and external learning experiences. And then finally, here with data reporting and accountability, we have Utah, which has now directed the state board to study requiring local education agencies to issue high school diplomas to students who receive an associate's degree or an industry certification comprising of at least 500 hours of instruction from a business, trade association, or industry group. For some people on their CTE journey, this will help them applying and being able to provide diplomas to it. Next off, moving on to funding. Funding is always an important part of providing and supporting CTE, and we're happy to say that 10 states have enacted 13 different policies. Leading off here, we see South Dakota with SB 59 appropriating $5 million to the Department of Education specifically for new and existing CTE programs. So this establishment also requires the applications and the awarding of grants to be from a partnership or from a consortium of school districts or schools. This shows that it's important to have partnerships amongst different regions and then also different educational locations so that it can be better suited to meet the needs of the areas. Now, Kansas then also passed SB 123, which establishes a $3,000 per year adult learner grant program through approved post-secondary institutions, including those offered through CTE programs for up to 48 months, for helping lifelong learners and for people that are looking to change careers or just want to add on to the skills, to the knowledge that they have to supplement their skills. This is an important bill that helps to remove a barrier of financial issues. And then North Dakota with HB 1030 now requires that the state Board of Higher Education to provide an eligible student with a tuition scholarship equal to $250 for one successfully completed dual credit course, $500 for two successfully completed courses, or $750 for 3 or more successfully completed dual enrollment courses. Now, dual enrollment is always an important way to help high school learners be able to get a leg up as they move up further in their education. And then it's great to see North Dakota supporting this and providing financial assistance to students with this. Now, finally, we're going to move on to graduation requirements. Graduation requirements are always an important aspect of CTE education. And again, we're happy to see that 6 states have enacted 9 different policies. First off, we have Arkansas, which allows for the substitution of comparable elective coursework in CTE for required core academic classes and develops an approval process for doing so. It's very wonderful to see Arkansas supporting the importance of CTE and then also seeing how it is an important part of the educational program to provide graduation. With Oregon, we see that they are now requiring students to complete 1/2 credit of higher education and career path skills, and additionally, also 1/2 credit of personal finance education. This will start applying to all high school diplomas that are awarded on or after 2027 in January. This is important, as we can see, because we want to make sure that students and learners are aware of the career pathways that are available and all the different options they can have for their future employment. Now with Maine, we have Maine is now requiring cooperative agreements between school administrative units and CTE centers and regions to include an equivalency agreement for credit gained through a CTE program to be accepted as a core credit towards high school diploma, beginning with the school year starting after June 30th, 2025. Now, as we can see, this policy is similar to the one that is enacted in Arkansas. So as we talk about predictive trends and future of what we might see coming down the pike, we would agree that graduation requirements are an area where policies are being strengthened and opened up to understand and agree with the importance of CTE education and how it is unequal with academic courses that were previously required for graduation. Now, as we were talking before, we're going to move on to the predictive trends. And I will send that over to Dan.
Thank you, Paul. So as we are thinking about some areas of interest for not only 2023, but looking ahead to 2024, whether we're talking to state members through our Perkins regional meetings, through information that we gather from our regional calls, or in preparation for our fall meeting coming up in October, or if we're looking towards some of the early introduced legislation in preparation for the 2024 legislative session, we can look at some of these predictive trends. And one of the big ones is increased investment in a variety of different workforce development areas that are either relatively nascent in terms of their development, or they are really seeing a lot of employer-led investment in a given area. So looking across the country, we've seen a big investment in the green workforce. So that's anything related to renewable energy, climate change education or climate change oriented jobs, climate resilience and climate resilience jobs, but also in the field of advanced manufacturing. Intel was a big one that went into Ohio, so there's a lot of information or a lot of open positions for semiconductor manufacture, for example. And then also automation and AI is, of course, being becoming more ubiquitous than ever before. And as those jobs are becoming more ubiquitous, we will see that CTE programs have to respond in kind to make sure that learners are prepared for the workforces that are ahead. For example, Georgia just implemented an electric vehicles career pathway on the backs of a large-scale employer investment into that state. I believe it was the largest employer investment in Georgia history. Next, Paul. The next one that we wanted to chat about is, of course, teacher recruitment and retention. Teacher recruitment and retention is not only a big area for legislative interest, but also an area of interest for quite a few state administrators. So we want to make sure that we're paying close attention to how states are continuing to recruit and retain teachers over the course of the next year. And then because industry partnership and work-based learning has been so popular over the last few years, we do suppose that that is going to only continue over the course of the next year. Funding and work-based learning and industry partnerships have always bounced back and forth as kind of the top two areas. And we do anticipate that continuing to be the case as we move forward into 2024. And then the last thing that we wanted to show off is our a little preview of our tracker. So there was, before we jump into that, there was a question from Angela from Data Quality Campaign. Hi, Angela, nice to see you here today. She asked the question of whether or not all of the bill numbers from the previous few slides will be shared. When we share out the slide deck, we will make sure that the bill numbers with links to the legislation itself is added to the slide deck so that you can click on those links and access those bills if you would like to do a little bit more deeper of a dive. Paul, if you wouldn't mind stopping your screen share for me. All right, so if you have seen last year's state policy tracker, you can see that this is very text heavy. So we always do an aggregation of the state policy and share that out as a complement to our year in review report. And this is 2022's tracker. So you can see it aggregates everything nicely. However, it is a little bit difficult to read and filter. So in response to more membership asks about the information that is being shared out, we did develop a more easily accessible tool through Power BI. So when Advanced CTE launches its new website in the end of September, there will be an embedded Power BI dashboard in our website that aggregates not only all of the legislation for this year, and you will be able to sort and filter by the year. You'll also be able to sort and filter by the states. You'll be able to click by the system that the legislation impacts. And you will also be able to see all of the different content tags that we use for each of the different policies that we have collected for that year. We try to be as comprehensive as possible. Of course, we can't always get everything. So for that reason, if there is a policy that's been implemented in your state recently, and you want to share that with us, maybe Paul can drop his information in the chat for you so you can send it to Paul. But this embedded tracker will be able to kind of click through, and you'll be able to identify and highlight some of the policies that you specifically want to see. So if you're curious on policies for the secondary system that impact funding, you'll be able to click those directly and see all of the policies that impact the secondary funding for CTE. These links will also be active as we move forward. Beyond this year's policy, we will also make sure that we are adding in all of the policy from previous year in review reports. So we will actually have a longitudinal tracker for you to look at if you're curious to see some of the other state policy initiatives and pieces of legislation that have been added over the last 10 or so years that we have been doing the year in review report. So really excited to share that information. I'm really excited to kind of give you a preview of what's to come. At this point, we do have a couple of questions in the chat, so I want to make sure that we answer these. Yeah, and if you have any other questions, certainly add them to the Q&A. The first is if there have been any policies that have been enacted that specifically focus on supporting rural populations. Paul Vilmer, have you been able to look through our tracker and see if there have been any rural population policies this year? I don't believe there have been.
There have not been ones specifically called out for rural populations, but one of the ways that it could affect populations in rural communities is increased access. So, increased access is a benefit to everyone, but especially rural populations because of the distances needed to travel. And also, sometimes a specific program might not be available in the specific region that a learner is located.
Thanks, Paul. And I do know in previous years, so for example, last year, if you look through the tracker that I dropped in the link, Idaho, for example, had a rural and underserved educators incentive that they had added in to recruit an additional rural populations into the teaching workforce. So there have been rural population legislation that has been enacted in the past. But we haven't tracked any this year that have specifically focused on rural populations. But to Paul's point, one of the tags that we do use is an access and equity tag. So you can filter the tracker by access and equity policies to see if there are policies, like Paul said, that impact all CTE learner populations, specifically in increasing opportunity and access for those populations statewide. We did have a question from Kelly. Do you track federal legislation as well? So this tracker and this report is specifically for state policy initiatives. Like I said at the top of the call, legislation, state board actions, governors, executive orders, anything like that. However, if you visit our website, you can sign up for our newsletter. And every week we have a view from the Hill. And that tracks a lot of the federal policy that's happening that impacts CTE. And our federal policy team and our comms director, Stacy, are really on top of making sure that that gets out every week. And so that's a really great way to make sure that you are keeping track of that federal legislation and keeping on top of understanding what's happening in Capitol Hill as well. And we'll give it just one more quick minute to see if anyone else has any questions that they want to drop in the Q&A. And our behind the scenes guru Tanya is dropping some links in the chat as well. So if you want to take a look at those, you can visit those links. All right, seeing no other questions, I just wanted to do a couple of quick plugs. So registration is open for Advanced CTE's fall meeting. That is coming up October 16th through 18th. So if you are interested in joining us for our fall meeting, the registration link is live, so you can go through the link that I dropped in the chat there to register for our fall meeting. And then we also have other webinars that are upcoming. So if you visit our webinars page, thank you, Tanya, you can register for any other upcoming Advanced CTE webinars that might be on the horizon. Otherwise, I just wanted to give a big shout out to our colleagues at ACTE for being such great partners in this work and making sure that we at Advanced CTE are always on top of things. So appreciate the partnership as always. And I just wanted to give a thank you to Paul and Vilmer for their analysis of the policies that have been enacted so far, and just making sure that we are able to share this information to you all and to our members as quickly and as readily as possible. With that, I will say goodbye today. Thank you. There is all of the contact information that we've shared in the chat. So if you do have any other final questions for us all, feel free to email us. And we would be happy to answer your state policy related questions. Thank you for joining us today. There will be a quick survey as you exit, so make sure you take that. That does just help us control the content and make sure that it is meeting your needs the best as possible for the foreseeable future. Thank you all for the time today. Have a great afternoon.